Welcome to another live stream. We are going to talk about the invasion, science around gang stalking, and really that's what it is. When individuals are harassed, when individuals experience surveillance, stalking, group mobbing, sabotage, maybe at their workplace, there are a lot of things to incorporate within this menagerie that targets are dealing with. And I've talked about many times that it's different but the same. So there are people out there that are dealing with pretty much everything. And there are individuals out there who are not, and it causes a bit of a, I don't know, it causes people to be divided, I think. There are targets who are literally dealing with technology that puts voices in their head. Other targets are not. They are dealing with maybe very low level break-in or surveillance, maybe some subtle sabotage at their workplace. Maybe there are different innuendos flying around within their social circle, or maybe even in their family. They can see that something is going on, but they really don't know how intense this stuff can get. And sometimes it stays at different levels for people out there dealing with that. Maybe they're just getting surveillance or the occasional break-in. Other targets are being hunted down to where they end up financially destitute, or wanting to check into a mental institution, because this stuff can get intense. I've literally seen that kind of thing, to where people are dealing with voices, whether it's a spiritual thing, whether it's some type of government thing, and they're telling them to do things, right? And it's like, well, you got to do this, and we'll leave you alone, right? It's a lot of the stuff that targets might deal with in directed conversations, right? And remember now, and we talked about this last time, that you have to be very strict on your criteria before you assume that there is actually gang stalking going on. Why? Because you can process information in a personal way. That's the whole strategy of sensitizing someone and making them paranoid. And it's not that the individuals are not targets, but what happens is that science gets them to process information in a personal way, and they end up reading into things, and it happens to all targets. We talked about the neutralization of that sensitization, that you have to be very strict with your criteria, and you do not want to be looking for these things at all, no matter what. You are tuning everything out and only, basically paying attention to very extreme and strong stimuli, following protocols, and simplifying your life so that you are neutralizing that technique. Because what do they want to do? They want to make your life more complicated. They want to get you into solution mode and get you into that game dynamic. And why do they want to do that? Well, there's a lot of reasons why they want, because you can't control what they do, right? You cannot control them. And they've got leverage. There's a lot of them, depending on who you are. Like I said, it can manifest in a lot of different ways. And what happens? Your life is turned upside down. You want to get it back. You want homeostasis. You want to regulate your scenario. Of course you do. Well, we're not going to let you. And so at that point, now they can turn it into a contest, and they can involve the individual's ego. But on top of that, the invasion of the target individual's mind, the sensitization that they experience, the processing of information, the environmental tyranny, depending on how it's working, well, they can actually turn you into your own handler, which you don't want that. And it happens probably on a minute scale to all target individuals. Oh, look, there's somebody, whistling or whatever. And then, you assume, because you're looking for this, all targets do it in the beginning. I mean, it's very frightening to be assaulted with this whole thing. And I've talked about the different times and different campaigns that can be involved in this type of assault on targets. Sometimes they get hunted down for like 2 solid weeks, to where it's just ridiculous. The manpower, the resources, they can go into that, and they'll try to drive the individual, so crazy that it's almost like they're trying to drive them to commit suicide or something, or it might be longer than that. It might go on, because there's targets that are listening to this video 2 weeks. 2 weeks is nothing. I've been doing this for 2 years, 2 decades, whatever, and it can be that way. But I'm talking about the real intense stuff. The thing is that they will change this stuff. But like I said, the neutralization is not only to realize that they are messing with you and trying to invade your mind, right? And use trauma invasion to use mind control on you, to turn you into your own handler, to sensitize you, to get you reading into things. They want you to be in fight or flight mode, and they want you trying to solve everything, right? Getting back to the point. And once they get that individual into solution mode, then they can really start hammering them, because that's demoralizing. Okay. If you've ever played maybe a video game, or you played chess against someone who's better than you, and it's just like the difficulty level is just tight. I have to practice, or whatever it is. If you experience that type of demoralization, it's designed for that, because you're not going to be able to control them. You're not going to be able to stop this the way that you want it to, but they're going to play it. They're going to play into that whole thing. And like I said, it can involve the invasion into the targeted individual's social circle. It can involve the invasion of the targeted individual's family. Sometimes those things happen as well. The psychological invasion, of course, involves the sensitization, and also the technological invasion, where targets will talk about their phones are hacked. They're dealing with all kinds of different anomalies. Every time they try to use technology, it might even be at the grocery store. I've heard some really strange stories, to where if you didn't know that this stuff could happen, you think these people were nuts. You think they were just reading into everything, but they're not. And that goes into the tyranny of their environment, which of course is ultimately for that emotional control and that propositional infestation into their mind, with all the different facets of disinformation that we've talked about before. And usually, one of the things that a lot of targets will run into is trying to separate the signal from the noise, and trying to combine the spiritual aspect with the technological aspect, or the dimensional stuff with the human stuff, to put it a little differently. Because you're obviously dealing with people. Depending on who you are, depending on what you're dealing with, you might not be. But usually targets are. Well, how's that work? Are they all working for the CIA now? Right, old grandma? Oh, no. She said she baked a pie, but really she got contacted by a CIA agent. She wants me to come over and give me a direct conversation. I don't know. That it's maybe, but it might be something spiritual at that point. Okay, and so that's one of the problems that targets run into, because they might go on the run, or they might move. Usually, that's what happens at first. That's usually what targets will do. They're like, "Well, I'm out of here. I'm leaving this city. I'm leaving this neighborhood. I'm leaving this apartment complex. I'm leaving this job. I'm out of here. Maybe even the country." But of course, what happens? They end up running into it everywhere, which plays into the gaslighting, which I've mentioned before, that when you use that criteria, and you also use the neutralization technique, that you are not reacting, you want them to become very obvious, because this whole thing is designed to make you believe you're crazy. If nothing else, they want everybody else around you to think you're nuts, right? Go ahead and tell everybody about it. It's very clever how this whole thing is designed, because you can talk about it, but unless you're dealing with another targeted individual or somebody who knows, it's not really believable. It doesn't seem plausible. The whole mechanism around it, involved in both the technological and the spiritual aspect of it combined together, you have to realize that it's there, and most people don't. And so they're just going to say, why are you experiencing so much attention And why would you be singled out, little old you, for all this, money supposedly that the government is spending? And like I said, sometimes they didn't even like that. Some targets out there are dealing with more of a spiritual issue, which involves technology. That's even the more confusing aspect of it, because a lot of targets will say, well, I heard a frequency, or I could hear, because sometimes when they deal with the V2K or other types of direct energy weapons, you'd have to assume it's got to be some kind of foreign power or the government or whatever. But man, they got their technology from them. That's, really when you get to the prophecies of Daniel, the end times are going to involve information similar to what happened in the Genesis 6 account when the sons of God left their place, and there was like that was actually the second rebellion. The first rebellion was before Earth was created, but we're not going to go into that. But then what? They gave mankind information. They built cities. That's where you get the secret societies, right? When you go into the Freemasons and the Rosicrucians and the Illuminati and all that stuff, you're going into all that stuff that started with ancient Egypt, which was after the Tower of Babel incident, where that was right after the earth was flooded at that point. So God was basically chastising the world, and they didn't catch on, and so the whole thing kind of morphed into that. And then you had the separation of mankind into different nations, and so on and so forth. But the thing is that information, that technology, comes to us from the spiritual dimension, right? So that it makes it more confusing, because there are things that you that's tech, and people, it's like, what is a demon? Well, they can be a lot of different beings, but basically they are disembodied spirits, right? Depending on what you're dealing with. You might be dealing with a principality. You might be dealing with something that is more on the lines of, one of the amalgamated spirits out of the Genesis 6 account. The late Dr. Michael Heiser talks about that kind of thing. But the thing is, they have technology, right? And so the issue is blurred. And then people experience the environmental tyranny of gangstalking, and they're on the run, and they're trying to escape these things. And then they start assuming that everybody's a Freemason or some type of government employee. There's a little bit of background noise. I apologize for that. And so that's part of the chain reaction that individuals deal with. And the people talk about the motives. Why would they? Well, some people kind of lean towards the experimentation, and I think that's real. They're trying to find ways to silence whistleblowers, but there's also the other weirder stuff, right? To me, because one of the things that you'll notice as a targeted individual is a lot of the stuff that comes at you, depending on how long you've been dealing with this, is that you're missing out, whatever, and you should have conformed, or whatever you should have done, and so now you're missing out on everything. But what are these people? I mean, if they're really that satisfied, if they're really that content, because there's a lot of things you're being deprived of as a target, depending on who you are. Why are they still doing this stuff, right? One of the questions that you need to ask, more than trying to get into that game dynamic or play into the ego, which they want you to try and control this and get a solution mode, is to just simply ask why. Why would someone do something like this? If they are really enjoying their life, if they are really happy and satisfied and content, why would they bother messing with me? Right? There's a lot of options out there. Go get it. Don't let me stop you. Well, obviously they have to do it for some reason, right? A lot of targets will deal with that stuff, maybe even in their family or in their social circle. They think their friends turned against them or whatever. What's up with that? And it's very sad to realize that individuals out there, by and large, can be manipulated. Getting back to the why, sometimes it's money. Okay. And there are a lot of people who deal with professional activity in their gangstalking scenario. People are breaking into their house. They're spending money on high-tech locks. putting up security systems, using different covert surveillance science within their dwelling place, and for some reason it gets hacked. For some reason they always get through the lock. It's like dealing with people off that Adjustment Bureau movie. It's like they could just walk through the walls or something. And it seems like that. I mean, but you're probably dealing with something more spiritual at that point. But the lines can be blurred. A lot of people talk about poltergeist activity, where something has moved around in your house. It doesn't necessarily mean something, involving a break-in actually even took place. It could be something else, which is really creepy. When targets are locked in their house with hardware, locking the doors and the windows, so on and so forth, from the inside, and they're in there alone. They might take a nap or something and wake up, and there's something sitting next to them on the table. Whoa, how'd that happen? That actually happened to a girl that I was dating, and she was like, that was really the end of that relationship, the beginning of the end. She was taking a nap and woke up, and she had finished the drink. She was living at a trailer that I was occupying at the time. Supposedly I owned it, but whatever. And that's another story. And she had taken a nap and fallen asleep, drank I think it was some iced tea, and the ice had pretty much melted by the time she'd taken a nap. I think she watched some TV or whatever. And something woke her up, and when she woke up, she felt a slight wind or something like that, like the air moving around her. And then she looked over, and there on the table next to her was a fresh glass of iced tea full of new, ice cubes and everything. And it freaked her out. That's the first thing she told me. And so that was like the last time she came over there. It's really classic. Some of the stuff that targets deal with. I mean, they get break-ins, and people might, rearrange your furniture or set a pen, up on something, or to do something. A lot of times, some of the ways that targets get communicated with involve different objects of significance. I've talked about that. Maybe a particular color or sign language or whatever. But sometimes it's just like an object. Maybe a coffee cup or a plastic cup or something, and then you come home and it's sitting there, some bullets laying on the ground in front of your car door, and you're thinking, well, I don't know, maybe somebody got out and parked over here, and they dropped some bullets on the ground or something, and okay, whatever. That's kind of weird. And then it happens 2 more times, and you've got 20 or 30 bullets, and you're wondering what. Okay, well, obviously that's not a coincidence now, and so now they're communicating with you. And then you go out to the alley to take out the garbage, and there's another bullet sitting on the dumpster, right? And they'll do that to targets. They'll terrorize them with those techniques, and ultimately they want you to be completely 100% consumed in trying to control this. Like I said, get into that game dynamic so that they can have that power, and you neutralize that by stepping out of that, ignoring those things, asking why. They need it, obviously, or they're getting paid or whatever, but they want your reaction, bottom line. And that's really the power they have over you. And the power you have over them is to neutralize those things completely. And realize that, technically you have a lot more power than you realize. I mean, after all, depending on what scenario you're dealing with, they are spending the resources. They are spending their time, the God-given time and resources. It's very confusing. So many things that people could be doing out there. So many things that productive, normal individuals would choose to do, other than to ruin someone else's life, drive them to suicide, or sabotage their future. That's not normal. That's bad. That's not good. And that says a lot. And that's the reflection of these individuals. I've talked about that before, that, when you get into persecution, it's a lot like the I don't know, the symbolism of the vampire and the zombie and so on and so forth, or the proverbial desert, that the vampire has no reflection, right? They have to assume that reflection based on what they go after. The persecution of targeted individuals or people who are victimized by narcissist abuse or whatever, they're vampires too, is that they come in and they assume that role. They play a role, or they play the opposite of the projected identity of their vessel of wrath, or their vessel of their emotional distress, which of course is usually in the form of anger, because anger is easy to deal with, and it is a shield, it is a sword that they will use. And so when individuals need to vent, they have an egoic death in their life where they experience something that dysregulates them, their method, some of the ways that people can be recruited into this is that simply they become victimizers. They become aggressors. They start to assume that identity. They start to invade the mind of their victims, to control them, to play with different masks, maybe similar to the narcissist predators that are out there, and gain their trust, make them dependent, and then they just feed on them, right? They vent on them, so on and so forth. Targeted individuals are scapegoats. And I've mentioned before that when you get into the social dynamics that are out there, it's a very necessary element in most of all the social groups that I've seen. There's always a scapegoat, and when the tension gets there, the tension is thick, or things are negative, or things are difficult, or things are abrasive, that people will find that scapegoat and they will start to vent and blame. Even in family circles, you get the black sheep and the golden child, so on and so forth. And it's sad, because a lot of targeted individuals are that black sheep. They are that scapegoat, and it's almost like these people deceive themselves into believing the delusion that they are creating, that somehow all the problems in the world are the fault of that black sheep, that scapegoat, that somehow it's okay to vent on them, or somehow it's okay to just illegally stalk and harass individuals because of maybe some disinformation. A lot of targets will talk about that they are painted as some type of sexual predator, or a drug dealer, or some type of deviant, or whatever. And now it's just anything goes. We can take off the gloves. Everything is justified. And now it's more of a fear campaign. I think some of the stuff that especially when you get into the paid perps, they get told that, and they just want the money though. Why do I believe that? Because there's plenty of people out there with criminal records, and they're not going after them. So they really cared about that. If they were like vigilante justice people who were after pedophiles or rapists or drug dealers, there's plenty of them all over. They'd be, they wouldn't need to wait for you, right? And coincidentally, they're getting 20, 30 grand or whatever they're getting. A lot of I've seen that kind of thing. A lot of targets will say they get gift cards. I don't know about that. I think some of that's disinformation. Really, the perps that I've seen, usually what happens is they get recruited, and there is disinformation, there is a smear campaign out there, but it's more of a social dynamic, and then the French benefits come. But once they get their hands dirty, it just depends on what they want to be done. Some of the stuff involves criminal activity where they're breaking into your house or whatever. They get paid for it. They'll get paid, or maybe you're hiding out in a crawl space, or in a close proximity to the house, watching it in a type of correlated attack methodology, to where you go to bed, your lights go out, and they start harassing the target with a noise campaign or whatever they're going to do. They get paid money. They're not doing it for free. Sometimes people are dealing with private investigating firms that get drawn into this thing, and they offer their services to the highest bidder. Some of them are ex-CIA, ex-FBI, and they're good at what they do. They want money. They don't care. They've dealt with some of the most vile criminals ever, and they're retired. They already did all that, right? They're going to use their skills to make profit. So money is definitely a motive. But like I said, you get into some of the weirder things when you get into the speculative psychic vampire, the loose hunter, where these people are getting off controlling you. They literally do. And some of them get regulated probably by spiritual entities. And we've talked about the occult and witchcraft and so on and so forth. Of course, we're moving up to Halloween. We can't leave that out. But a lot of people focus too much on that, I think. And then it becomes ridiculous. I think Halloween was probably mostly about harvest and stuff like that. There's a lot of things involved in it that do have the occult in it. Obviously, there's some very demonic themes. But when you get into the true nature of those things, it's a lot more sophisticated. And they like people to focus on the gutter, on the lower levels of that tier. So it's like, people that are looking for the Loch Ness monster or something. It just looks ridiculous at that point. That all Satanists or people involved in witchcraft or whatever are just out in the graveyard, sacrificing, animals or digging up skulls or something like that. And really, when it comes to gangstalking or whatever, you can see that individuals are being correlated within the framework and the salient landscape of that target to propagate those delusions, which they believe, because really those people, even though they are in communion with very powerful entities, they themselves don't really have any power. Okay, it's one of the confusing, the confusing aspects of that, because a lot of people will say, well, the witch or the warlock or whatever, they put a curse on. Well, they're just people. Yeah, they're involved in stuff, and they might, some of this, it gets creepy because it's like a lot of targets will talk about the mind reading or whatever, and sometimes you have weird things going on. But there are ways to explain some of that. I've made videos about that, but there are very powerful entities out there, but people are people. And so the spiritual, fingers of a human being are only as, they're a physical creature. Even when you get into the remote viewing or the astral projection and stuff like that, some of those people will talk about how that is done, and they will assume that they are literally traveling through the astral plane or whatever. And other individuals have come forward and said that it might be more of an illusion involving that entity traveling through the astral, and there being some type of connection with that human. And they just kind of believe they're doing it. I don't know. I would never mess around with that stuff. It is real. They do those things, remote viewing and astral projection, however that works. But it's probably not real in the way that people believe it is. This is kind of my point. Just like witchcraft is real, but it's not real the way people believe it is. The people are just people. And so one of the things that happens to targets is they'll become so paranoid, and understandably so. Because the witchcraft was probably more of a theme back, in the 90s and before that. Now it's more of a technological thing, but I think that's I don't know. That's just one of the unfortunate byproducts of some of the disinformation out there. Because really, there's a lot of spiritual stuff going on, but there's disinformation on both aspects. And so when targets are dealing with a type of environmental tyranny, getting back to the point is that, those propositions can form in their mind, and they look really crazy now. What's wrong? What's happening, Bill? The witches are after me. Oh, really? The witch. Okay. The warlock has put a spell on you. Of course they did. Now you really look nuts. So that would more likely be involved in some type of demonic oppression. And it's not to say that these people aren't doing that, because I've seen it. I've had individuals try to leave things in my house and other things, and you could feel it. It was tangible. I mean, there was spiritual activity going on. But the thing, like I said earlier, separating the signal from the noise and understanding that ultimately you just have to draw near to God. And when you're dealing with this whole thing, and the truth will set you free, and ignoring and neutralizing these things. And remember, they want you to process information in a personal way. So rather than to freak out and start, writing letters to your governor or whatever, try to regulate yourself and relax and just let them do all the hard work. Right. I mean, it's, I'm not saying that when you get stalked and harassed in a very aggressive way, that it's easy to ignore. It's not. But remember, you're asking the question why. And once you do, you're going to have a lot more power psychologically. A lot of things are involved in your perceptual framework. And a lot of people say, well, it's just what you perceive it is. That's partially true. Because if they can get you to believe that you're missing out, if they can get you to believe that they're winning, if they can get you to believe that they have power over you, and that they're watching every move you make, they're reading your mind, and they know what kind of cereal you're going to eat tomorrow, then they have power over you. But they don't. A lot of that is an illusion. Some of those things don't really matter anyway, and they don't matter because they're ridiculous. These individuals are pathetic. They really are. I mean, who is going to spend their time doing something like this? I mean, you look at someone who's addicted maybe to a drug or something, and to the point where they're not even eating food anymore. It's sad to see that. And these people are similar. They're similar because, like I said, there are so many, normal options out there that people could be using their time and resources for. They're not. And so the other inevitability, of course, I've mentioned this before, is that there's going to be a judgment. Okay. But that's not going to be good for them. Right. If you're merciful, you'll receive mercy. Right. That's a pretty simple concept, isn't it? Right. Do unto others, you would have them do unto you. You live by the sword, you'll die by the sword. Right. If you're cruel and merciless and you ruin somebody's life, your future is going to be ruined. And that's going to be something that you have to remember. And I've talked about that plenty, is that, if you believe, like I said, if you believe these lies, we're winning, we're getting away with it. No, it might look that way. And of course it's that way and by design, because God's not going to just, intervene because your faith needs to be tested. If you're a person of faith, that goes into the other stuff that we've talked about, where you get people, thinking that everybody who's targeted is a chosen vessel of mercy or nobility or whatever. That's not necessarily true, but people do get persecuted for their faith. And one of the things that is obvious, and it's involved in every gangstalking scenario, is evil. It's evil. And therefore there are spiritual fingers involved in every one. I'm going to get out in the comments and see who's out here. Casey Ryan, welcome to the live stream. Is that it? Oh my goodness, we have a lot of comments. And looks like there's some other. Lord, be a lamp unto my feet. Welcome to the live stream. We have a very active member here, Casey Ryan. Okay, and you had a directed conversation with an LADPD, and they are done talking to me. They pretend like they had a call for shooting down the street. So you must have been trying to get help. And you probably were talking to them. Sorry about that. I kind of just jumped into the comments. I'm moving through these. A lot of targets will talk about that. The problem with talking to people about this is reasonable motive and explaining why. Because, all that attention, the targets do get harassed. Like I said, the hunting campaign can be very intense, but explaining to people why they are, such a person of interest becomes difficult. And of course, if there's no evidence in a reasonable way, like I said, they might move something around in your house or whatever, or, do something low level, but it's just not enough. Or you find out that, maybe the individuals you're dealing with, whether they're involved in the mental health system or the police or something, seems like they know something, and they might. And that's creepy. The thing that you have to remember as a target is these things are theme based. So you fall into a category. It's like the control programming. And I've talked about that a lot, where targets believe the TV is talking to them. They believe that the radio, the people they know, and they know everything that they're dealing with, they're talking about. It's like a directed conversation right on the radio. And if they process that information, it's like they know this. It's like they're in a matrix at that point, and it seems like it. But really, you have to realize that when they do a mass gaslighting campaign, when people are targeted, they are targeted in mass. So you will deal with that kind of thing. It's hilarious. But they don't know about you specifically. But the themes, similar to the stuff that targets are sensitized with, whether it's the colors or the whistling or whatever, that can be used on targets in mass. Say you've got a crowd of 100 people and 20 of those individuals have been sensitized to those things. You could, walk up and pull a speech off and use all those things. And, what would you have? You'd have 20 people who thought you were talking directly to them. And the other 80 people are wondering what the hell you took before you came up there or what you had for breakfast because you're acting weird. They wouldn't know. They wouldn't process that information the same way. Why? Because they haven't been sensitized. The directed conversation would not work. The mass gaslighting campaign would not work on them because they are not, targeted. And that's, it's similar to a lot of people try to figure out why, some people can hear voices in a crowd and other people don't. Well, you could do that with a laser and frequencies or something like that, or you could even do that with technology from the spiritual dimension. But the thing is that, they are singling people out with this type of science. So when a regular individual turns on the TV or the radio or they're hit, or around the environment that would trigger a target, somebody who's been sensitive, they're not going to even notice it. It's similar to that effect. I talked about that in the last video, where you have someone who just bought a particular type of vehicle or something, and now you're seeing it everywhere, right? Well, it's in your salient landscape now. You're processing information differently. Michael, Brian Chastain, welcome to the live stream. Q Amy owns you. Army owns. Sorry about that. Owns you. Okay. Oh, so this person is threatening me. Really? Well, I've seen what it's like. I've had a lot of people attack me and everything. I've had a lot of property damage, and it sucks. It really does. I hope you're joking, because I certainly wouldn't do anything to you. But that's unfortunate that you have to do that. Yeah. So we're just going to have to get rid of that individual. I mean, what do? You try to come on here and be a peaceful individual, and you have someone who is a hater, who is threatening people. And that's unfortunate, because, because a lot of targets are accused of being mentally ill. And if that was true, well, it's not really their fault. It's that people get angry with them. It's like you can see the contradiction, right? It's like some of the things that were going on in the targeted individual community, to where people were just constantly being harassed by certain individuals. I'm not going to mention who they are, but they of course they kept saying, well, you guys are just schizophrenic. Well, then just leave them alone. They're crazy. What's your point? If they're hallucinating, why are you so angry? Of course it's contradictive. Doesn't make any sense. And we'll move on. Like I said, that's unfortunate that we don't have any moderators in here, obviously. Steve, welcome to the live stream. Okay. Doug, welcome. Doug says, Jesus Christ helps endure what I've been going. Helps you endure that, yes. Sometimes we get a bit of a typo in here. Okay. Well, just looking through the comments here. David Dobson, welcome to the live stream. JSD 7502, welcome to the live stream. Pamela Barone, welcome. Looks like Casey was a victim of a noise campaign. Yeah. Why would someone even threaten you like that? That comment is very telling. And so, when someone would say, "I'm going to show you what stalking is like," why would someone do that? Why would you even do that anyway? Right? Because you're a stalker. So you're just looking for a victim anyway. I've seen some of these people find individuals to pick on that they regretted it. You just never know. You just never do. You never know who you're messing with. All gang stalkers are cowards anyway. Oh, let's see here. Yeah, we don't have any moderators in here. Catherine, Jennifer, welcome. Yeah, Steve says people like to hide behind a keyboard and say things that they would never say to your face. Yeah, it's like when you're driving down the highway and somebody does something in traffic or whatever, and then they just flip you off, and they would never dare do that to you. And it's like I said, they're cowards, people hide from the shadows and do things. They're pretty much telling on themselves. Anybody could do that. I was talking to somebody the other day, and we were talking about firearms. I had my first gun when I was 6 years old. I grew up hunting. But one of the things that I learned very quickly is, I even at age 7, I could shoot out the headlights of a vehicle over 50 yards away with an open sight with a 22 LR rifle. That's they gave weapons to children in wars. If you look in history, I'm not going to go into that right now. And just as young as maybe 10 to 14 years old, and they were soldiers. They killed people. It's not hard to do. It really isn't. It's when people take the time to really help individuals or try to make a positive difference in the world that I think that's a lot more difficult than just lashing out and being negative. And I think, unfortunately, there are people out there who just that's all they're capable of. That's really all they've got. That's all they've got inside. It's like I said, it's a type of reflection, and you always have to ask the question why somebody would do something like that. Why would they be so full of hostile hate and energy? That type of negative energy. It's just it's not good. It's definitely it's definitely something that shows you who you're dealing with. So many other things that people could be doing, so many other activities that they could be engaging in, and they're not. They are obviously very desolate individuals. Like I said, the proverbial desert, the proverbial vampire, the proverbial zombie, right? They are the stalkers. They live in a desolate place, and they have to feed, and they have to steal and devour, and they really don't have any of those things. Otherwise, it's unfortunate. And Lord be a lamp unto my feet says, this is all about control, keeping your mind on things that bring you joy. Also reading the word daily and praying. Yes, that's true. David Dobson says hobbies. That's good. And that's important to keep your mind occupied and to try to focus on something like the Lord be a lamp unto my feet says, it gives you joy. Right? Because they want to steal all that. They want you to be afraid. They want you, your defense and your survival mechanisms to be hijacked, to be in a heightened state of alert. And it is mind control, right? And it's fear based, a lot of it. Like I said, these individuals are, obviously very needy. Oh, Edie, welcome to live stream. Okay. Okay. Well, guys, I'm probably going to end the live stream now. I just wanted to come on real quick for Friday. And like I said, I'm probably, I've been working a lot, and I have to work every day because the economy has taken a hit for the delivery guys out there. And so, unfortunately, I've been very busy, and other things have been going on. I'm not even going to go into that. People, are saying that I don't know what stalking is. I guarantee I know what stalking is. I'm surrounded by 7 cameras, and I've dealt with a lot things I won't even talk about. But people join the party, and eventually they're going to be judged for those things. That's unfortunate that happens, but it does. It happens. I think the job of some targets out there is just to be bait. That is just, you get into the legal framework that's out there. I've talked about that before, where you get into the secret societies, or you get into the occult or other things, and it's like they have to engage in certain things in order to become part of the group, or to become part of a clan, or to be, to gain access to certain resources or other things. And once they do that, of course, they're owned. They have crossed a line that, is there for a reason that you're not supposed to cross. And I mentioned before, the biblical guidelines of treating other people the way you want to be treated. Doing unto others, you want them to do unto you. And those who live by the sword will die by it. And very simple principles that are out there. The merciful will receive mercy. The ones that aren't, they simply won't. And when they engage in those activities, it becomes a lot harder for them to break away from that, because they have given into that. And there's a certain criteria in that legal framework that gives ownership and geographical control to these spiritual beings, which are the ultimate handlers. There are human handlers too, but ultimately this goes into the spiritual dimension. I'd like to thank everyone for showing up. Please remember that when you are dealing with this stuff, that you want to try to ignore it as much as possible. You want to try to tune these things out and to focus on things that are productive. Try not to react. Try to simplify your life, and try to do things rather than to ruminate on the gangstalking that are going to be productive for you. Maybe your diet, maybe financially, whatever is there in your landscape. Try to focus on something that you can affect and control, because there are a lot of things that you can't control. There are a lot of things that targeted individuals are, attacked with, that are completely out of their control. And of course, they want you to focus on those things. And you don't want to do that. Always ask the question why. And remember that when you're dealing with the infiltration and invasion of gangstalking, it's an invasion into your mind. It's psychological invasion. It might be an invasion into your social circle. It might be an invasion into your geographical location. But at the end of the day, once you see the motive and you realize, what you're dealing with, you can neutralize these things. I'd like to thank everyone who has helped support the channel. The link is in the description. God bless. Be good to yourselves. Be safe.